All right, we're now live on YouTube Live, weekly YouTube Live. It's May 4th, bright and early at 10 a.m. And this is Sharif here with Dr. Kevin Majors. And well, last week was awesome because we had a great session talking about sleep. And we introduced the two general principles, which are, Kevin, what are they again?
Sleep pressure and sleep efficiency.
Okay, and then so we saw
And
that,
the most important practice.
and the most important practice, jumping out of bed the moment your alarm first sounds,
Yes.
which we even got so excited about. We made a special video, which you can check out on our channel, the top 11 reasons to jump out of bed the moment your alarm first sounds.
Basically, all of psychology is contained in that first second of the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's your inflection point for the whole day. So I super recommend people watch that.
Absolutely. So, and then, so we were, after talking a lot about the principles, and we actually also talked about best practices, that being number one. Also, some others about exercise in the morning to become a morning person, some other things. So check out that video for the full. But then we got lots of follow-up questions on how to apply these principles in other types of situations. So we wanted to do another follow-up session focused on sleep as well. So you want to just start with the first question?
Yeah, we got a great
Cool.
First question.
Yeah.
That
really
it's going to
gets
help
to
us
the
really
heart.
clarify exactly.
Yeah. And it also shows how, stay tuned, but sleep fits in with all these other aspects of our approach,
Yeah.
So here's the question. If every time I feel tired, I jump on the treadmill, will that amplify the feeling of tiredness because I am acting on it?
Yeah, so it's a very clever question.
Yeah.
So the issue is, I talked about before that if you have an impulse and then you act on it, that you're going to end up training your brain to notice that impulse more. Technically, it's called thalamic gating. So, and you are opening the gates for that kind of sensation. So if you feel hungry and every time you feel hungry, you act on it by eating, well,
Mm-hmm.
then you're training yourself to notice the hunger sensation. Now, what I'd like to show is how this fits in with just how we train our brains in general, and
Mm-hmm.
how do we get sensitized to our own sensations. In this case, let's take tiredness. And there's a little graph that I made that we can put up showing what happens when you give in to the tired feeling. So in this case, let's say that you're at work and you start getting more and more tired, and now it's like at a 4 out of 10, and you say, okay, I'm just gonna go take a nap. Okay, you've acted on it, but it's not just that you acted on it. It's actually that you gave in to what it was wanting.
Mm-hmm.
So tiredness is not a simple sensation. It's like an emotion. So, and if you act on it by giving into it, by, in this case, resting, sleeping, then it goes away momentarily, but you've increased its power. And so next time, say, a day, a week later, tiredness comes back and goes up even higher. And then if you again act on it, you keep training yourself to feel tired by satisfying it when it comes. Now, this exact same graphs would occur if you're starting a running routine and you go running for a little bit and then you start getting winded and then you stop running and then the windedness goes away. But if you give in, it's going to get worse the next time and you'll get more winded. You're going to end up thinking when you give up, oh, this just isn't for me. I'm just not a runner. Okay, let's talk about the cure for this. Habituation. Now, with habituation, the first time you encounter the sensation, and don't give into it, but just let yourself fully feel it and keep going against what it's asking you to do, it habituates over time. That's that tall, it gets up to a 10 out of 10, but then you get through it. Now, this could be for running. The first time you try to go running and you get that windedness, but then you just keep going, you keep running, just let it be there and you keep going. Then you get what's called a second wind. So the second wind is just this windedness, which is a little bit of a fake sensation coming from your amygdala, just like tiredness in the daytime or tiredness, especially in the morning. It habituates if you don't get into it. And the next time you go running, trial number 2, it's less. And the next time, number 3 is less, and 4, until finally you don't get winded at all as you go running. So it's the same with getting a wave of tiredness, while working or trying to be mindful or whatever. You get a wave of tiredness. You need to welcome that wave. That's where the growth is occurring. So, and that's how you essentially retrain yourself not to feel so tired in the future. So you might get to the point then, I think I'm done with the graph. You might get to the point where you could, if someone asked you, hey, how tired are you right now on a scale of 0 to 10, you could give them a number, but it wouldn't have been on your mind. And this is, again, it's an issue called thalamic gating, but if you're not monitoring something and acting on it by giving into it, you do generally stop noticing it unless something really out of the ordinary is happening.
Okay.
And that's what we want people to get to with tiredness. It's the same with jumping out of bed in the morning. If you jump out of bed, you don't pay attention to how tired you are, so you stop noticing it. So you can go decades never thinking about how tired you are when you wake up in the morning, just because you've gotten in the long habit of just jumping out of bed the moment your alarm first sounds.
So then, real quickly, just to summarize the answer, is this distinction of acting on it by giving into it, or acting on it to kind of resolve it and actually embrace the challenge? So if you act on it to give into it, it leads to the sensitization where it gets harder and harder over time.
Yes.
If you respond to it, engaging the challenge,
Yeah.
it gets easier and easier over time with habituation.
Yes. Tiredness is like an appetite for sleep, but it's like hunger. You know that many times you feel hungry, but you don't really need to eat. And you can get through it without eating, and people can fast and then they get through the hunger, and so it's the same with tiredness, actually, that you can attain a wonderful freedom from tiredness. This gets to the questions about napping. Maybe we can talk about napping.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 2 questions about napping. Why don't I just read them both, and then, because there's some overlap, but also some differences. First question: does napping have an effect similar to coffee by lessening sleep pressure during the day, or is it an overall negative effect? Obviously, since you can't work while napping like you can work while drinking coffee. Then the second question: can you address the advisability of the short afternoon nap? If a person wakes up at something like 4:15 a.m. each day and goes to bed around 9:15 p.m., is there a harm in napping around 2 for, say, 30 or 40 minutes?
Great questions. So what I would say to that is napping does reduce sleep pressure, and it is going to interfere with sleep efficiency. So you could have a harder time falling asleep on days you take naps, but you can also get poorer quality sleep on days that you take naps. So that in general, when you read the books on sleep hygiene, we do recommend people not nap. So, but there's a bigger problem, which is the sensitization problem. That what kind of momentum do you want your day to have? And if you are noticing yourself getting tired and then you give into it by taking a nap, that breaks all momentum. True, you may be able to recover, and so and then have good work afterwards. But wouldn't it be even better? So I'm not saying it's necessarily terrible, but wouldn't it be even better that you're able to work so well that you are deriving energy from your work and going into flow, the highest state of focus? And as you're in flow, the last thing on your mind would be to nap. So it seems to me that if you are really working very well, you would want to keep that going because it's so enjoyable. And flow is practically effortless. And you don't even notice the tired sensation when you're in flow. So it's much better to find out, how do I establish like a habit of attaining flow, just doing the golden hour, and then keep flow going throughout the day so that my whole day becomes a day of flow. And if that were the case, you wouldn't actually nap unless you were sick. So if you're sleeping basically 9 p.m. until 4 a.m., that's enough sleep. So I don't see, and you generally don't want to break up sleep into portions. So it's better to get it all in one go for most people in most circumstances. So naps, the bigger issue is the rhythm of the day, losing momentum and not being able to be in flow. It could be recoverable, but it's not ideal.
Right. And so, and like, is there an exception if someone, say, has a crazy schedule of, if they are working an early shift or a late shift or something and it throws things off, then if they're only able to realistically get like 5 hours, would it maybe be okay? Or how would you?
Yeah, I don't want to be like a nap police,
Yeah,
and trying to, make sure that no one in the world is ever napping.
right.
But and there can be times, but even then, um, in general, it's better to maintain a regular wake up time and then to go to bed, so that you can get your normal amount of sleep.
Mhm.
And if there's something weird that happens and you don't get, regular night's sleep, um, that's fine. Your body will handle it. It has great ways of replenishing itself over time. So much so you don't really need to sleep extra or change your sleep times. So the body is so good, at managing sleep deficits, so that you don't need to worry about that too much. So even then, to the extent people can just maintain or get back to a regular, it's better to stay awake and go to bed again at the regular time and then wake up at the moment you said, because that's the basis for all sleep hygiene, is a fixed wake up time and jumping into bed the moment the alarm first sounds and not going back in it.
I love it. It's very demanding. It's very demanding, I have to say.
It's easier. It is
It's
far
easier.
easier. It is far easier in the long run. So the difficulty is just like the habituation curves. So yeah, at first it's harder, but then it gets easier and easier and easier as you practice it. And that's the way all best practices work. They're harder a little bit at first. There's a little bit of toughness, but they pay off. So we also have great questions on making up sleep. Maybe we can go to those.
Yeah. So two questions here that are also very closely related. So the first is the idea of catching up on sleep. Here it is. Is there any truth to catching up on sleep with the extra hour on the weekend? Or is it really just better to have the same time every single day? It would seem from what Kevin said, this was last week, that once you hit the 5 cycles, that is maximum effectiveness. And then the second question is, how do we get back on track for our sleeping schedule once we had left it?
Yeah. So it's a good question. Can you make up sleep that you miss? And the answer is not really. So the brain is really good at restoring deficits. It doesn't need you to change sleep times to kind of to help it out and to make it work. So let's say that a person normally sleeps 7 hours at night, and then one night he goes and only sleeps 2. And then the next night he only sleeps 2. Now, people are going to be shocked to hear, I think, but the way it works, if you think of how much extra should he sleep on night number 3, the answer would be 2 extra hours. Okay, so then he could sleep 9 hours. It seems like it's little. It's that you can only make up 20% of a sleep deficit. And if he had accumulated a 10-hour sleep deficit, you can only make up 2 hours of that. So, and if you, actually, there's a little bit of fiction in that, because the sleep deficit doesn't really carry over night to night. In some ways, yes, you do get worn down. There are studies showing it's better that people maintain the same amount of sleep night to night than that they get a certain amount of sleep in general. So it's better that it's consistent. So this is controversial, but there are good studies that suggest that. And to me, that makes sense because the brain is wonderful at adapting to what you give it if it's consistent. But inconsistent, behaviors around sleep, that's the problem. As much as we can, we want to have consistent patterns of sleeping. You can move your weekend wake up time about an hour later, but you shouldn't really have too much more total sleep time. At least I would say you don't really need it. What you want is sleep efficiency. That means your brain knows how to progress through the stages of sleep. And for your brain to do that, it needs to know when you're waking up so that it gets used to programming that. So it's much better that people keep the wake up time. And so say you go a night sleeping only 4 hours, keep the wake up time. Stay up until your normal bedtime the next night. So, and I guess, what's 20% of 4 hours? You could go a little bit earlier to bed, but
45
not much.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go 45 minutes to bed earlier, but it's not that much. That your brain has two different deficits in sleep. It has a non-REM deficit and it has a REM deficit. Should I go into that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right.
It's intense.
Okay. It's pretty close. So if you pull a total all-nighter and then sleep the normal night period, the next night, when you wake up that next morning, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel like you just got the best sleep ever. But it's because that night you're making up your non-REM sleep deficit. That's the restorative sleep deficit. But you still have a REM deficit, and your brain will delay that to the next day. So then the second night of sleep after an all-nighter, when you wake up that morning, you're going to feel terrible because you have spent much of the night in REM. By the third, fourth night, finally it's back to normal. So the brain has its super clever ways of making up deficits that are more complex than you know. But the way you feel after playing an all-nighter, well rested after night one, but then bad after night two, it just shows you that there's all these things that your brain is doing. It needs to be able to do that work efficiently. And so it's best that it knows a reliable schedule. And so it's used to then, and you'll actually, if you have very reliable sleep schedule, say 10:30 p.m. till 6 a.m., and that's your normal thing, move an hour later on the weekends, you will be better at making up sleep deficits. And you can have a really bad night for whatever reason. You ate some spicy thing that kept you up for hours, or who knows what it was, something unusual. Fine. You'll be okay the next day because you've trained yourself not to give into tiredness. And then your brain will be really good at making up the deficit because of the regularity that you gave it.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of related question, which is a question of my own. If you woke up a bunch of times during the night for whatever reason, it was loud outside or baby crying, or you had some injury that kept you up, do you then your morning alarm comes and it's easy to think to yourself, well, I actually slept like an hour and a half less than I normally do because of all that waking up, so maybe I'll extend an hour and a half.
The road to ruin. That's the road to ruin. Yeah, because your brain, to have efficient sleep is better than quantity of sleep. And for efficiency, having a set wake up time and keeping your wake preference intact. So that's what happens when you get used to waking up at a certain time. You will in general be way better off just by keeping that wake up time. And then, but to really make the wake up time real, you have to jump out of bed the moment your alarm first sounds.
Literally jump out of bed.
Literally jump. And if you don't have arthritis or problems, yeah. Okay. Orthostatic hypotension. There are reasons you shouldn't jump out of bed. They're not that common.
Okay, and then we have two more questions to go through. You ready for these?
Yes.
Okay, the first one is about supplements to help aid sleep. So are there any natural supplements? Natural supplements or activities?
The best natural supplement for sleep is darkness. So
that fits my experience.
Yes, when it's dark outside, when the sun goes down, you go to bed. And when the sun comes up, you wake up. That's the rhythm. That's the natural rhythm. Everything in our body is tied to that. Keeping the room very dark is tied to that. I don't really like the idea of needing to supplement sleep because it means you're trying to problem solve tiredness. Sleep benefits from benign neglect. Basically, set the wake up time and that's it. you'll eventually go to bed at the right time. I've worked with tons of college students. I stopped paying attention to trying to help them go to bed on time because it's just like it's a constantly shifting sands or something. It's hard to get it's a foundation. But if they forget the habit of waking up at the same time, then they eventually are going to bed at the right time naturally. So I found you just focus on the wake up time. So natural supplements, what you're trying to prevent is a little bit of tiredness the next day by getting to sleep a little bit earlier. That's a lot like sleep greed. In general, it's they can be used. They can be used short term, or if there's a particular stress, melatonin is pretty safe. So, and if you talk to a doctor, other meds can be used, but they should be used short term or maybe just for travel or certain very specific things. So I'm not totally against all things, but just in general, we want to be aiming for the goal of 7.5 hours of natural sleep that didn't need any supplements. Um, the People in general need to pay a lot of attention to what they do for the couple hours before going to bed. Screens, so having bright screens, the computer screen is especially bad, or an iPad screen if it's really bright. Maybe TV screens aren't as bad, but still not a great way to fall asleep. So the cutting out screen time earlier, can be very important. Dropping the body temperature faster. So one way of doing that is taking a hot bath or shower about 90 minutes before you would like to be falling asleep. And what that does is it artificially raises your body temperature up, and then it drops more quickly as you're cooling off. And then that mimics the dropping of body temperature that normally signals you to fall asleep. And that's easier to fall asleep. But in my mind, that's a little too problem solving. And but if it did, for someone, if it helped them to set a good night routine that involved getting away from screens, not doing intense work, maybe it'd be a good part of the routine. So these things can be flexible.
Okay, and then last question. So you've been kind of pretty demanding. Oh, I know you said that it's easier, but at the same time, sometimes if it's the afternoon and you're getting pretty tired, it can be difficult to kind of push through it. And so the question is how this relates to like reframing mindfulness challenge, which is the key 3 steps for engaging any challenge.
Yeah.
So if you're tired in the afternoon, is there a way to apply these 3 steps to help you better engage that challenge?
Yeah, so I think you should reframe the experience of tiredness so that instead you're thinking of some ideal that you can be practicing. So if you are trying to do some act of love or service, it's even more loving and it's even better service if you're doing it while tired. It adds to the beauty of it. So to do the ordinary things of life, to be, it's actually part of being professional that you can work at your very best no matter how you feel. And there's a kind of freedom from your own feelings that you can attain. And so I think people should be, yes, generally getting enough sleep, but they should be seeing tiredness does not have to have a controlling impact on your life. You need to break it. So the more tired you are, the better a chance to break it. That's like the 10 out of 10 curve on habituation. So bring it on. I'm going to get through this. And you'll realize it's mostly in your head. It's just like, when people are, like I was saying about running, like when you're going running and you get winded, you just keep going and then it lifts. Well, where was that? It was in your head. It was artificial. That's exactly like the tired feeling that you actually get in the afternoon. So it's not that your body actually needs sleep, because once you get through it, you wake up again. And then in the evening, you're feeling great. That proves it wasn't real. It was an emotional reaction. Tiredness is really an emotion. Welcome it, but then lean the opposite direction. And that means to then reapply yourself in your work. So reframing actually raises blood flow in a way that probably is effective on its own in waking you up. Mindfulness wakes you up. So mindfulness increases blood flow to your whole prefrontal cortex. So that's why we don't recommend mindfulness as a way of falling asleep, because it wakes you up. Just being mindful, is enough to. Remaining perfectly still, that could be very mindful. Man, if you're perfectly still and you get an itch somewhere, that itch will wake you up. So there are all these ways. Sometimes, even though it sounds strange, making sure that your inhale is longer than your exhale wakes you up, because there's a sympathetic phase as you inhale and a parasympathetic phase as you exhale. And so if you inhale long, exhale short, you actually get more awake. So I've used that in lectures or things I was attending where it'd be embarrassing to fall asleep. But being perfectly still for me in public places is the best way of making sure I stay awake. So I think that these things are all workable. They're all things you can get better at. So, and that just has to be the goal, to have a practicing kind of mind and to see what is it I'm aiming for. I'm aiming for a total freedom from being tired. And it's not by giving in. Energy comes instead from ideals and from reframing.
So even tiredness is an opportunity for growth.
Tiredness is an awesome opportunity for growth.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's a great note to end on.
All right.
Okay, well,
Great.
thanks so much for
See you next
watching.
week.
We'll be on next week, Monday, May 11th at 10 a.m.
Perfect.
All right, thanks so much.